In October 2019, I requested a bond audit. Why? Because in the FRIA, there is actually a process whereby it's mandated to audit any large scale securities up to and including bonds that have been issued as part of the requirements that were set up as a result of the S&L crisis. Now, during the 1980s, I was a little girl, right? Technically, I shouldn't be responsible. Don't you think? I was below the age of consent. I was not old enough to engage in any financial transactions on my own. My parents were members of the. My mother was married to my father, who was in the military. We lived on military installations. We never owned our own house. Didn't have major investments. Why would a little girl below the age of 13, when it happened, 13, right, be in any way, shape, or form responsible for whatever ended up going down in Dallas or elsewhere as part of the S&L crisis? Well, nonetheless, presumably there was a process, legislative, congressional hearings, and there were law changes. And among the law changes were a requirement on an annual basis for an audit of bonds. Now, at the time, my understanding is they had a lot fewer general obligation and municipal bonds, public securities, at the time than they did later on, that they do now. So, after attempting in 2017 to receive some assistance with somebody that I understood formerly actually had a position in an executive agency on a federal level, it could have actually very easily assisted me and actually was by law required to. Then there was a situation where I understood there was a need to audit some bonds, specific bonds, that were so directly correlated with events in my life and my family's life. So in October 2019, I made a public post on a blog I had at the time. Now, see, my understanding is since then, somebody took the information from that blog and they created some profile. And they sold that profile. And other people now walk around with it as their identity and they use it as options. And so sometimes there's this process where I create things, very important things, potentially very profitable things, very safe things. But I know that I'm being spied on, and there's been absolutely nothing close to due process. And so they take it and they use it for crime. And so rather than getting to use it myself, and rather than getting to be connected to a community or an organization of people that are actually responsible, what I've found is I'm still kidnapped and my stuff is still stolen to be used by terrorists. And the worst part is, these terrorists are actually supported by members of Congress and members of the Senate, including people who have been in Congress or the Senate ever since I was a little girl. Now we have a very important time frame where this kind of matter is actually coming to bear. I contend it was unconstitutional and it was against existing law for Congress to think they were entitled to consolidate whatever was otherwise accessible based upon local bond instruments under their federal purview, including to use for the federal appropriations process. Now, there was a bill pending in the summer of 2019 to do just that. And in the course of what's happened with COVID 19, my understanding is that part of the illegal and even very, very, very highly inappropriate processes that have gone on with the consolidation of assets and the complete misrepresentation of what is actually the financial status of this country has allowed for there to be this misapportionment of funds that are supposed to be for one specific purpose into milieu where they can be used for others. And because there's been such rampant abuse of public office by political actors for so long, the refusal to hold them accountable has allowed for people that have made their career out of gaming the political system to their advantage. It has put them in positions to have created their own little American oligarchies. I, for one, am not interested in competing in order to get their attention so one or the other of them can get more or less merit based on trafficking me and scores of other people. If at some point in time somebody else, either under duress or out of opportunism, decided to allow for what was happening to them to be characterized in some sort of manner that may imply cooperation, that's not my concern. What is my concern is what else I have here. And what else I have here are processes that I've had available for several years. Plans I came up with. These two folders, along with this other folder here, that I tried to start doing public education on, using videos on my YouTube channel, are really what we need right now. We also need to follow up on reports that I submitted to numerous federal agencies while I was a recipient of services that were funded, at least in part, by Health and Human Services, as well as Housing and Urban Development, going all the way back to the beginning of 2016. I wasn't concerned with the hedging strategy candidates were putting together during their election campaigns with the anticipation that whoever won in the next cycle was going to continue to undermine the federal government in order to pay off people they had strategically recruited in the intervening 10 years between when I had first been in Chicago and when I returned. That wasn't my concern. And it's still not my concern. But what is my concern is that the United States is verged on doing one of the most hideous things that's ever been done with whatever this alleged infrastructure project is. Perhaps somebody has some ideation that they are appropriating a spiritual systematology that is actually connected metaphorically and structurally to things that are sacred to other people. You're trying to pass off in the course of drugging people that the hallucinations you're broadcasting at them in acts of electronic warfare are somehow supposed to placate the turmoil we're going through morally and spiritually because of what you're actually literally underwriting into our future based upon crimes from the past you've tried to cover up. It's not acceptable. I have a very comprehensive, very potentially immediately engageable transportation plan that I've had for over 2 years that also correlates with reconciliation of past problems we have not attended to, including what really happened with the Megaport initiative, including appropriations for Transportation Security Administration that were laid down in 2008 that have material relevance now. To start, right? And then from there, we can talk about the other matters, including the fact that coming up very shortly, we're going to have a very major moment in global consideration of what I contend was a willingly engaged pension scheme that was kicked off, so to speak, in Europe in the autumn of 2019. That is very, very, very important right now because of what was not done in order for it to be successful. What is the status of the requirements per the Basel Convention regarding disclosure of information concerning source origin in financial transactions that was supposed to be implemented in July of 2019? This is a very important matter. These little laws on confidentialization were not only illegal and unconstitutional, they were unconscionable. And by law, any contract you've tried to set up under any of these laws has absolutely no legal standing. And if you've tried to take the actual contract agreement and create it as some sort of derivative, including for trade on the futures market, then you're guilty of even more egregious crimes. And if you thought you could create schedules or timelines and then conveniently erase the data so that people you're trying to hold to those schedules and timelines don't have records for themselves, and then subject them to secret processes where you hold them accountable for debts you won't admit you illegally obligated them to, well, then we're in an even worse problem, and you had absolutely no business trying to appropriate somebody's spiritual systematology as part of your congressional racket. We're in a very serious situation. You know, it really hurts me. It brings me not only mental duress, but every once in a while, actual physical pain, like the pain I was in this morning when you were doing some sort of adjustment to your finance scheme, that I have to comport myself with this kind of resonance and behavior because of the egregiousness of the actions you try to pass off as legitimate statecraft. It is on you to reattenuate. It is on you to recalibrate. And it is on you to admit that the standards you tried to impose last summer were completely false. That it was a complete farce and it's been a complete failure. You don't have much time. By the way, I have finished what would have been the requirement on my end from the Department of Defense in responding to what was allowed to be represented in the media yesterday as the response to the situation of the material moment and needs we have in this country. Where is yours? Any of you? What did any of you do to actually meet the standards you said you were capable of meeting?